Hello to everyone who's here. My name is Emily Szerafy-Cox, and I'm with the Peace Development Fund. I am going to share a quick presentation. I'm going to only share some of the slides on this presentation. It was designed as an info session for potential grantees. So some of it will be relevant for today and some won't, and that's fine. I am a foundation officer at the Peace Development Fund, and that sounds like a fancy title, but really the Peace Development Fund is a small organization who funds even smaller grassroots organizations. We do grant making across the US and in various parts of the world as well. So this is a little bit of an introduction there. So the history and values of the Peace Development Fund is that we were founded in 1981. So we just celebrated our 40th anniversary last year. And we are what's called a public foundation, which means we raise money from the public in order to operate our programs and one of those programs is to give money out in grants. We also have a fiscal sponsorship program and capacity building programs. I'll talk about that a little bit as well. When we were first founded, it was on the heels of the Vietnam War. And as the name implies, we were founded to fund the peace movement. In a minute, we're going to watch a video. Oh, I need to actually refresh my sharing so that I optimize it for video. Let me do that real quick. There. So there was a shift in terms of the focus of how we were thinking about peace, so that peace is not just the absence of war, of course, it is the presence of justice. And so we as an organization have always invested in grassroots organizations, saw that as a real strength that we could bring to the world of philanthropic giving. But we were organizing donors, organizing people who had resources to water the seedlings of the movement, as it were. So our mission statement is that we work to build the capacity of community-based organizations. We do that through grants, training, and other resources. And we really see ourselves as partners in human rights and social justice movements. So this is that video that I talked about. Oh, this is the PDF version of it. I'm sorry. I thought I opened the PowerPoint version. Let me reopen this so that we can actually watch the video. This video was created to celebrate our 40th anniversary last year. And in it, you will see interviews with different people from throughout PDF's history, present, and then also thinking about the future. And so that is one of the strengths, I think, for me about PDF is the balance of strong history with thinking, being visionary in terms of how we are investing in the future of the social justice movement.
If someone is screaming in my face and I punch them and knock them unconscious, they're not screaming at me anymore. Did I just create peace by punching this person in the face? As absurd as that example is, this is how our society tries to create peace. Mass incarceration, if we just lock up all the criminals, then we'll have peace. If all the Black Lives Matter protesters would just shut up, then we'll have peace. But in reality, in a world where violence has become so normalized, peace is a messy process because it requires justice, and justice is loud.
So the Peace Development Fund started as a consequence of the nuclear weapons freeze campaign. We called it the Nuclear Weapons Moratorium. And we were all focused at that time in the early days on issues of peace and disarmament, particularly nuclear disarmament. And at the same time, we realized there was almost no funding available for grassroots groups. And it was only grassroots groups that were going to bring about change in people's attitude. So a few of us decided that we would start a fund that would fund exclusively grassroots work.
All 5 programs are the Sustainability Project, the Community Organizing Grants Docket, the Donor Advised Funds, Fiscal Sponsorship Program, and the Special Initiatives. We understand and believe that folks in the community know what they need. So our job is to get them resources. We have folks in our systems by design who are part of those movements. That gives it strength and capacity and credibility and respect and trust. So when we're sitting down across the table from somebody in the community who's just meeting us for the first time, we're not bringing BS, we're bringing real experience. And that's that authentic relationship on which we base our grant making. Our job is to get resources and try to get it to you. And your job is to do what you need to do in your communities, not us to tell you that.
BASE was the Building Action for Sustainable Environments. And it brought together 15, 16 communities that were all living near some chain of the nuclear cycle. For the first time that I've ever known, bringing all of the pieces of that chain together, all of the links of that chain together, so we can see the entire arc of the nuclear industry. And this isn't just unique to BASE. There's such a need for grassroots organizations to come and meet each other and to do collective visioning and collective strategizing, but then no one has the time to organize these big types of gatherings. In a lot of the initiatives that we put on, PDF took on that role, where we would pull together groups of 40, 50 different activist organizations and give them 3 or 4 days. And again, it wasn't like an agenda that we planned. We kind of handed it over to them and saying, we'll fund this gathering, we'll do all of the logistics, we'll buy all the plane tickets, and you all figure out what you need to talk about.
All these people were coming together and bringing a bunch of organizers into a room that were willing and committed to figuring out how are we able to support each other? How are we able to address our cultural differences? Having people on the board was a very important issue. To have the representation that we needed to understand what was happening in the indigenous world and the issues that we needed to address from a grassroots perspective, to ensure that we were being able to fund the communities at the level that we were.
And it was oftentimes a messy process, right? Because it is such a new thing. It wasn't always perfect. It wasn't always clean. We had arguments. But I think the fact that we had arguments with our grantees says a lot, right? Like, how many foundations have the type of relationships where they can have real conflict with their grantees and get through it and never question that the funding would be cut because we were having this conflict? There was already the relationship and the trust that allowed us to go to that depth, that allowed the grantees to trust that, oh, PDF is really serious when they say that we're gonna try this thing called co-creation. We're gonna try to actually co-create this initiative with the grantees, with PDF just being one of the people that had a seat at the table.
And how could we build a movement that would allow us to see the movement as a whole rather than individual movements going on in individual communities? How do we build a movement that is sustainable? What is it going to look like when you have your son? What are the next 7 generations going to look like?
So the video goes on for a little bit longer, but that gives you a flavor about the kind of vision that first opened the organization and how it has carried forward over time. Just a review of the programs, program areas that our executive director, Paul Heibel, in the video outlined. The community organizing grants, which we receive about 150 to 250 applications. Sorry, that should say 200 applications per year. Although we're doing more outreach all the time, so maybe it'll increase. Of that, we give about 20 to 30 grants, depending on the year. And that is what I call our PDF directed grant making. So that's the pot of money that's discretionary for our grant making committees and our board of directors. We also operate a fiscal sponsorship program, which is a way for new emerging organizations, or just organizations that don't have 501c3 status, to operate for some charitable purpose, usually related to social justice work, and we sponsor their charitable work so that donors to that organization can get tax deduction for their donations, and they have access to things like foundation grants and so forth. That part of our organization is a huge part of our programming. We have 45 organizations in our fiscal sponsorship program, and grant. There's grant money moving through our system to the tune of about $3 to $3.5 million per year. So obviously a much larger portion than our community organizing grants, but our community organizing grants in a lot of ways are the heart and soul of the organization, even if not the largest financial portion. I'm going to skip up here to donor advised funds. That was mentioned on the video as well. Donor advised funds are where a donor gives a chunk of money and then advises the foundation about how to disperse that money, usually over time. And our donor advised funds are all very aligned with our mission and values. We're not like Fidelity, where people can just park their money and then say that they've given to charity, but not do anything else with it. That is about $1 million of grant making per year. The sustainability project is our capacity building project. And of course, because of COVID, our capacity building trainings really changed, because we used to fly to an organization and work with them for several days with intensive trainings with them and their board. And so over the time of the pandemic, we've expanded the number of groups that we're reaching through digital means, of course, and providing capacity building trainings in a more remote setting. And then our special initiatives is a lot of what they talked about in the video as well. This is issue-focused partnerships with grantees and other funders. So just a quick thumbnail about our community organizing grants. That's what is really going on right now for our organization. Well, right now we're also fundraising. We're always fundraising, but of course at the end of the year, fundraising is huge. So the community organizing grants, as I mentioned, focuses on small organizations. We need $250,000 and below. Organizations that are led by the people most impacted by an issue. And are engaging in community organizing in order to address the root cause of whatever issue they are trying to address. I mentioned 150 to 200 applications. That goes down to about, this probably should say 25 to 35 grants. It kind of depends on the year, and we've, as I said, been expanding. We have an open application process. So that means that anybody can apply for a grant to the Peace Development Fund, and it will get read by a live, real human. And that is not something that very many national foundations can say. Most foundation grants, you need to know somebody in the foundation, know somebody on the board, develop a relationship, and even if they allow you to submit something unsolicited, it's something short like a letter of intent. And then they read that, and if they see something there on this, short one page that you send them, they see something there that is of interest, then they might invite you to submit a longer application. With the Peace Development Fund, we read applications from anybody. Of course, that does mean that we have applications from some folks who wouldn't qualify for our grants. They don't read the guidelines and so forth, or they don't quite understand the guidelines. But the other thing that we do is offer feedback calls to everybody that we turn down. So if an organization applies to us, then they also, and are declined, they also receive an invitation to schedule a time to talk about their application, to talk about the guidelines for our grant making, and potentially what other funding opportunities might be better for them. I'm just going to quickly, I'm not going to go over everything on this slide. I'll just kind of highlight this Braiding New Worlds Fund. This is the fund that we created to celebrate our 40th anniversary. And as I was talking about, the 40th anniversary was as much about looking forward as it was about looking back and celebrating the past. And so the fund that the board created to celebrate focuses on youth organizing. And recommendations are made by a youth grant making committee of youth organizers from across the country. As you can see from this slide, the average grant size is about $5,000. For our Pioneer Valley Community Advised Fund, it's a little smaller usually, but that's about the size that we're talking about. We also have a Rapid Response Fund grant that I'll just quickly point out up here. Those are very small grants, $500 to $1,000. And that's a rolling application. There's no specific deadline for that. So it's a different process. I'm going to skip over that. These are the 4 pillars of our grant making. We, as I said, focus on organizations that are doing community organizing. So I had a meeting with a donor on Monday who said, okay, how do you define community organizing? Is it the community coming together to, say, build an irrigation ditch that they need for their farmland? She funds heavily in Haiti, so that's what we were talking about. And I said, and she said, or is it like advocating to the government for, some change to a law? And I said, sure, it could include both of those things. But in some places, or for some communities, advocating to the government for a change in the law may not help them along, or it may not be where that community is at. So sure, it could be organizing to create an education program in your community. However, that is not the root of whatever problem it is that you're trying to address. So what is the broader vision of that organization beyond the, as it were, direct service that would be provided by an irrigation ditch or an education program? We invest in organizations that are small. So we also want to prioritize organizations that are working to build a broader movement. Small organizations that just work in their one little corner can be effective, but they can be more effective when they work in collaboration with either other issue areas or other geographies, other organizations and communities. organizations who are working to dismantle oppression if you're organizing for a marginalized community, chances are that's a key focus of the organization, is to dismantle the oppression that has created that marginalization for whichever community it is that you're a part of. In addition, we prioritize organizations that are dismantling oppression within their own organization, so that we're not, as it were, recreating systems of oppression within the organizations that are trying to dismantle it. And then creating new structures. If you're dismantling something, you have to create something new, and that could mean, the community connections. That could mean a new sense of identity. That could mean new programs. That could mean new methods of understanding power. That could mean co-ops. That could mean new ways of providing community support to each other, or changing laws, or could mean many, many different things. But creating something new out of the dismantling. Very quickly, we don't fund individuals. Again, small organizations, budgets under $250,000. I talked about that we mostly focus on the United States. We also fund in US territories. So that includes Puerto Rico, Guam, Virgin Islands. There are other US territories. And we also have historically also granted in Mexico and Haiti with the community organizing grants. I'm really excited that last year it had been a long time since we had a Haitian group who had been far enough in their development to be able to be competitive in the grants process. Of course, Haiti is a difficult place to do community organizing right now. So really excited to have funded a Haitian organization last year. So in terms of, if you were to volunteer or be an intern with the Peace Development Fund, what would the timeline look like? What would you be doing? We are opening our application process for these grants on Friday, and our deadline is in January 6th. So organizations have about a month and a half to fill out the application, and reviewing those applications is a big job. And we could not do this grants process without the help of volunteers and interns. Every year we have a dedicated group of folks who are learning about grant review and grant writing at the same time as helping us actually do review and actually winnow this list of, say, 150 to 200 grants down. So during the month of January and February, well, really it starts in December with training and a little bit of review, but the bulk of the applications come in that last week before the application deadline. You think that you procrastinate with your school projects, the same is true for grants for us as well. So that end of December, January, and February time is really reading the grant submissions, having discussions in weekly intern meetings about various applications that you read, applying the criteria. We get more deep into each of the funding criteria, in trainings that we do with interns and volunteers, and then we winnow it down to a group of 40 organizations that then go on as finalists, and those organizations then are interviewed. So I mentioned that it's a rigorous process. It also takes a while. And our board of directors and our staff are all involved in this process. And once we are in this March time with the interviews, that's where interns will be doing interviews themselves with some of these community folks from community-based organizations, as well as references that they give. And then in April, the beginning of April, is when our board of directors votes on the final grants, and our interns can see the fruition of their months of labor. And so then that group of grantees, about 15 or so of those grantees, go into what we call Grassroots Funding Week. And Grassroots Funding Week is an opportunity for us to raise money, raise more money to support these organizations, but also to help the organizations themselves do a fundraising campaign with their networks and exercise leveraging the national platform that the Peace Development Fund has, to that they can say, we got this grant from a national funder. Please help match those funds by donating to our campaign. So, some groups raise a few $100s, some groups raise several $1,000s through this Grassroots Funding Week time. And the more, and we are seeing that as an opportunity to do more capacity building work and training around fundraising. So interns are definitely involved in helping set a lot of that up as well. I think that I'm just going to quickly talk about that we prioritize general operating funds as opposed to program or project funds. So when we give a grant to an organization, there are no stipulations about exactly how they have to spend that money, other than that it has to be legal and charitable. But it has to be work that forwards their mission. So when, for instance, when the pandemic hit, there were a lot of organizations who suddenly couldn't fulfill the grant guidelines that they had with other funders. And so a lot of foundations spent a lot of time with their grantees trying to figure out, well, okay, you can't do that in-person convening anymore. Well, what can you do with this money now? Submit a new proposal that, about what you're going to do with this money now. Our grantees didn't have to do any of that because we trusted them with those funds. And we heard from many grantees that was kind of a breath of fresh air for them, and provided some stability during obviously very uncertain times. I talked about Grassroots Funding Week, talked a bit about the capacity building offerings that we have. And then also, of course, a community of other grantee organizations is something that we provide. And interns are often involved in some of the convenings or events that we have, either for grantees or the public or both. And so, helping to plan the event, helping to publicize it, do outreach, and then ultimately implement the event. We actually have one this evening that I don't know, Bryan, if I can maybe send you the information for it. This evening at 7 o'clock, it's what we call a peace talk. Those are the events that we have. This one is a virtual one, and the topic is that Creating New Worlds Fund that I was talking about earlier. So it's focusing on youth organizing and the investments in youth organizing that the Peace Development Fund has been making, and kind of where youth organizing really is going, and what are important to young people right now. So that's obviously that's a very big topic. They won't cover all of it in the hour and a half, but I'll send you that information so you can distribute it out.
Yes, please do, Emily.
Yeah. So then I'll just kind of sum up with bringing it back to this idea of watering the seedlings of the social justice movement. A few years ago, I was meeting with a donor who said to me, you know, I don't have that much money, like in comparison to like really, really rich people, right? I have money that I want to give away and I'm prioritizing that, but I have a finite amount that I want to give away. And so I'm trying to decide what is the best way to give away my limited money. You know, you all support such small organizations. How is that really going to have an effect on the movement nationally? I mean, we have big problems in this country, is kind of how she framed it to me. And I said, you know, I believe in organizers. I believe in the leadership that comes from community coming together to create self-determination for their own community. And the leadership that springs out from that goes on sometimes within that movement and sometimes out in other things, creating new movements. You know, there's all kinds of trajectories that you can talk about in terms of how we have changed our thinking over time based on the leadership of people who came from previous social justice and human rights movements. And so this work really feels like you're watering those seedlings. If you don't water your seedlings when they're that big, come July, you're not going to have any fruit. And so we're some of the organizations that we funded 10, 15, 25 years ago now are running gigantic operations and having major impact. So, and many of them got their very first grant from the Peace Development Fund. So that's kind of where I will leave you for this portion. I know we're looking to have maybe like a Q&A sort of portion afterwards. Yes, Bryan?
Yeah, so if that concludes your presentation, we're happy to open the floor to students for Q&A. And I'm sure they're forthcoming. It's fine. You can unmute yourself and ask the question directly. If you don't wish to be on camera, you can type in the chat and I'll read it aloud. So do not fear.
Bryan, what sorts of questions have you gotten from students as they are looking for internships?
I guess, I mean, you're in the peace space, you're also in the fundraising space, so it's like a very specific. Can you, well, what would you say are sort of the skills necessary for the type of work that you do? I ask that because oftentimes when students are considering applying for positions, they'll say, oh, but you know, I don't meet everything in the position description. So what I find myself saying at times is, well, there is no perfect candidate. 1, 2, this is an internship. Organizations are going to recognize that you are seeking to develop or further existing skills, and someone's going to give you the chance. So if you think that you can do at least 70% of the position description, I encourage you to apply. Don't count yourself out. Let them decide yes or no. But I guess what sorts of skill sets would you say are necessary for this specific type of work?
Honestly, I feel like there are skill sets that we can utilize many different skill sets. And one of the things that I have really tried to do with the internships are to well, and I've seen my colleagues do as well, is, oh, Danica, she's really, really good at XYZ thing. Let's have her work on this particular project. Or this person is really interested in gaining more skills in a certain area. So let's have them work on that project. So I guess I would say, if somebody is good with numbers, I can use them. If somebody is terrible with numbers but wants to talk to people, I can use them. I mean, obviously, for the grant review portion of the internship, it's important to have an understanding of how of the things that happen in the world. I mean, because these grants are describing communities that exist, that are struggling and are struggling with all different kinds of things. But it's really those like critical thinking skills around not just taking something at face value, or remembering, oh yeah, we're looking to see if an organization is led by the folks who are most impacted by an issue. Well, this organization is trying to address issues of immigration and human rights, but almost their entire board is white folks who were born in the United States. So sounds like they're really well intentioned, but that's not the sort of organization that we fund. And there's actually an organization that I'm thinking of that's like that. And so we've actually worked with them over time as they have transitioned as an organization very intentionally to now be led by the immigrant community itself. And the white folks are stepping back. Not to say that white folks can't also be immigrants, but they're focusing generally on Latin America. So I think that I know that that's kind of a non-answer answer, but
no, but it's super helpful and informative.
Please apply. It's we can use folks with all different capabilities.
Are you in person or remote or hybrid or?
It is not required that people be in person. We have an office in Amherst in Amherst, Massachusetts, if people want to use that, or if they happen to live in that area or what have you. But for most of the 3.5 years that I've worked at PDF, we have been entirely remote with our interns, and that's completely fine for an intern. We have an intern right now who lives in Oregon.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Coast to coast. Okay. Coast
to coast. Yes. He actually was a Brandeis student, I believe.
Oh.
I don't, since this is being recorded, I guess I don't necessarily need to talk about individual people, but
sure.
I saw that you put the link to our website in the chat. Thank you so much. For the folks who are watching the recording, it's peacedevelopmentfund.org. And the event that I was talking about is our virtual peace talk. The power is in youth, and with the TH in parentheses, so the power is in you. And I didn't come up with it. And I like catchy. So it's tonight at 7 o'clock Eastern time, and I can email you that info.
Yes, please do. And then here, I think the student might want this too, which is the link to the internship sort of. Let me paste that into the chat. Oops, there we go.
I have another question. So for the youth, let's say for the youth, I guess for the applicants to be able to apply for the funds, do they have to be registered as nonprofit, or they can just be like a group of people?
That's an excellent question. One of the things that is unusual about the Peace Development Fund is that we we accept organizations, of course, that are 501c3 registered charitable organizations. We also accept organizations that are fiscally sponsored and therefore have charitable status through their fiscal sponsor, or organizations who don't have charitable status but are engaged in work that is primarily charitable. And so, of course, we also operate as a fiscal sponsor. So sometimes we have funded an organization that then we've gone on to fiscally sponsor. But no, an organization is not required to have any particular registration or determination by the IRS, other than they need to be they have to have an EIN and their own bank account. We're not writing checks to individuals, for instance.
Okay. And this has to do with like peace development only, like community, for the community, correct? So I think I came here a little bit late. So I saw one of the slides earlier that talk about what you do not fund. So social service, educational programs and stuff like that. Those, all the listed there cannot be funded, correct?
So that's a good question. Maybe I will go back to that slide and clarify that a little bit, because it's not as though we don't fund educational programs, because how in the world are you going to build power in your community if you don't educate yourselves together about what power is, or the issues that are connected to your organization, or if the people in your community need some sort of direct service just to stay afloat right now, then that might be where your organization is currently at. However, if that's the only thing that your organization is doing, then no, we're not. Well, that's not our priority for funding. We don't fund social services, educational programs, or research that are not linked to a clear organizing strategy. So if it's, for instance, there are a lot of organizations who are led by either currently or formerly incarcerated folks, and they, one of the things that their constituencies struggle with is having enough money in their commissary accounts. So they would do fundraisers and fund people's individual commissary accounts. That is direct service. However, they also are developing relationships with folks on the inside who then are becoming leaders in their organization and building that community, building that power, and are a part of the change that they as an organization are pushing for. So they have a broader vision than just, we need to help the people right now. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for the questions.
Yeah.
And in the chat, I pasted the registration for the virtual peace talk at 7 o'clock tonight.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm ahead of the game here.
Very much so.
But otherwise, does anyone else have any questions? And that's fine if not. Emily, I want to thank you once again. I think it's been 2 years since we last connected. Time flies, but it's also been a long time.
We did one last year. I don't remember.
Did we?
Yeah. Well,
Oh,
we
gosh.
had an intern from you folks last year, so I assumed that we did an info session, but I could be wrong.
My apologies if that's the case, because that's where my mind is. But regardless, it's wonderful to see you. I appreciate you taking this hour to present to our students, helping to inform them as they think about career choices, and just really informing them about the nature of their industry, of their interests, of the peace world. So your insight is valuable as always, and I want to thank you again for your time.
Absolutely happy to do it. I
Yeah.
hope some of you or some of your classmates come join the team at the Peace Development Fund and both learn with us and do some stuff with us.
Fantastic. Water the seeds, right?
Indeed.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for being here today. And for those of you who have class at 2, you've got 8 minutes. So maybe use the restroom, get a glass of water. But otherwise, we'll see you around. And thanks to everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.